Welcome to the Fairview Social Podcast. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I wanted to do a short or perhaps long series of podcasts, just, I don't know, talking about the past 10 or 15 years of my life. And it's really nothing extravagant or crazy, but I was sitting here yesterday thinking about a friend of mine in Haiti. His name is Celeste, and he passed away a couple days ago, and we got the message here in the States that he had passed. He got sick and in the hospital for a few days and just didn't make it. And honestly, it's hard out there in Haiti. The medical care is not like it is here. You have your basically, for those of you that don't know, I've been to Haiti a lot of times doing mission work and things like that. And basically, you just have to be careful. You got to be careful not to hurt yourself, because, if you cut yourself or break your leg, or you do something like that here in the States, you go to the doctor, they bandage up your little boo-boo and send you on your way. It's not necessarily the same out there. So those people live a life of being very cautious of everything they do, because, if you get sick or you get hurt, there's not a ton of care for that. But anyway, I was sitting out here in Holliswood Studios just thinking about Celeste and thinking about our visits. Probably 3 or 4 of my visits to Haiti in the Port-au-Prince area is where I met him. I did most of my work in a different area, which I'll talk about in a later episode. But it got me thinking about just how I've landed where I'm at right now and how it shaped me over the past several years, and thinking about how my life was years ago. And I just wanted to kind of go through and talk about that. Now, we'll preface this with, I don't ever really take notes, and I take notes. No, don't get me wrong. I take notes if I'm trying to learn something or something like that. But, if you did a Google search on how to set up a podcast, how are you supposed to do a podcast, or what are some tips on podcasting? Well, it would tell you that, hey, you need to make an outline of what you want to discuss. You need to make the points that you want to make. You need to have an intro and a conclusion and all that stuff. Well, I think I tried that once, and then I never did it again, because my brain just will not allow me at this point anymore to sit down and think it through and do that kind of thing. All the Chester Boom episodes, I was trying to write down some things, and mainly just to write it down to remember it, because I have a lot of problems with remembering things, specific incidences as I get older, which is very strange, because my grandfather's 93 years old, and he can remember, he would be like, well, that happened in 1943 on November 11th. I'm like, good Lord, I can't remember hardly anything. And I think that probably has something to do with, we get all dependent on electronic devices and things like that. But anyway, I digress. I'm going off on a different path, but that's what I'm saying. I can't sit here and write an outline out. So when I was thinking about doing this series, I was like, all right, I'm going to have 4 episodes, and I'm going to talk about this in this episode and that in that episode, and that's what I'm gonna, and that's how the outline of this podcast is going to be. Well, I don't have the patience for that, and so I'm going to sit here and I'm going to just speak it as I remember it, and that's just how I do things. And so many may listen to this and be like, man, he's unorganized, and man, what's wrong with this guy? Well, there's plenty wrong with me, and my thoughts are pretty unorganized in an organized way, if that makes any sense. And so we'll just start. We'll just start here, and I'll talk for a little bit. And when I get tired of talking, I will end it, and then we'll do another episode. So I'm not gonna give every exact detail and event. Times are probably all messed up, but I want to kind of talk about just how I got here, how I ended up in Haiti, how I ended up in Mexico, how I've ended up in these places, and just how, all of this happening while my kids are growing up. And so I guess we'll start here, because when you're kind of thinking about these events in your life that completely changed you, I always think back to this particular event. And so I'll start here. So it was a cold November night on November 15th of 2010. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. So a long time ago, this is probably about 15 years ago. Actually, not 15 years ago. Yeah, maybe 15 years ago. Those of you that have listened to this podcast have heard, I think on my third episode, I had Bert Hester on here with me. And I lived in a house that was kind of in his backyard. And I was living there, and my family was young. Eli was young. Jack was just pretty much, newly born, maybe a year or two old, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 2 or 3 or something like that. And Hayden is young. I remember the kids running around in the house in their diapers or naked. That's usually how it played out. I was working at LSI. I just started there. I remember I started there as just like a crew leader guy out there mowing and weed eating every day. And just, it sucked. I was making $13 or $14 an hour, which at the time it wasn't even really that good. But it's, it was decent. Of course, we got a lot of overtime back then. And so that's how I managed to get the family by. Nikki wasn't working. We kind of made the agreement that I would find the money, whether I had to work 10 jobs or one job, and she would make sure that the kids were taken care of. And I had one big rule that my kids can never ride the school bus. And why, you may ask? I will tell you why. And you may have heard this in another episode, but all of the bad things that I learned growing up, I learned on the school bus. So I never wanted my kids to ride the bus. I always wanted them to be taken to school. And I can honestly say we did that. We got all 3 kids through elementary, middle, and high school. Nikki took them to school. There was very few times that I don't think I ever took them to school once. There was a few times that I had to pick them up, but I was pretty proud of that. And Nikki and I were kind of thinking about it and reminiscing on that after Jack graduated earlier this year, that, hey, we got all 3 kids through school and they never rode the bus. If they did ride the bus, it was for a field trip or something like that. And it was always funny. I remember when the kids were younger, they would come in and say, hey, I went on a field trip today. Oh, cool. How was it? I got to ride the bus. Okay, well, I guess that riding the bus is acceptable. But riding the bus with all the different age groups of kids in your neighborhood is not acceptable, because everybody's at a different level and you just learn all these bad things. But anyway, so we grew up in that house. I bought that house, uh, a couple years after Nikki and I got married, and we were living there. And I remember it was everything we could do to buy that house. And my dad helped us with the down payment, and we got the house and we moved in and we loved it. We loved having Hester as our neighbor, and things were good. We were a young family, but I got a lot of just a lot of mornings when I was laying in bed and hearing it rain. And so those of you in the landscape industry know that if it rains, or if it rains too hard, you can't work. And for me, as an hourly employee at the time, if I did not go to work, then I did not get paid. And I had the pressure of a family of 5 of us depending on me to bring in the cash. Nikki would make money here and there. I think later on in our journey here that she would clean houses or do things like that. But yeah, I was the main person making the money. So I'll never forget laying in bed and hearing the rain, and hearing how hard is it raining, how big are the drops, is how wet is the ground, how just all these things. I guess in another life I could have become a meteorologist, because I was always watching the weather, because that was going to determine if I made any money. And so if you got rained out of work, you didn't get that we were working 10, 12-hour days, making $13, $14 an hour. So you're trying to shoot to get that overtime. And so getting the overtime is where, you made good money. A lot of our Spanish friends, especially the ones that are on this H-2B program, where they come in and they work with us until October or November, and then they go home for several months and then come back to the States in March or April. It's a government program. They don't care about anything other than working. They just want to work. And so they're sending their money home, and it's fine. It works out fine. But for me, I had my whole life here, and if I didn't work, I didn't make any money, didn't have any food. And I remember there was times where, the family of 5 of us, I would give Nikki $50 to go and to go to Aldi's. For those of you that don't know Aldi's, check it out. Foods, I don't know if it still is. I usually just go to Walmart or Publix down the road now, but back then when you didn't have any money, you went to Aldi's, and we bought food for 2 weeks, and it was kind of nerve-wracking. So I was dealing with that kind of stress, and it's funny because when you're dealing with that kind of stress, what do you lean to? How do you fill that void? Well, I filled the void by I started drinking, which thinking about it in retrospect is always funny, because I didn't have enough money for food, and this is always a thing that I think about. Like when I was a smoker, it's like I didn't have money for gas or money for anything else, but I always had money for cigarettes. And it's the same with drinking. I'm given and don't get me wrong, there were times where we were making big paychecks, but it was a crapshoot every couple weeks of how much my paycheck was going to be depending on the weather. And so some weeks were really good and some weeks were not. And also we were young, and I was young, and I wasn't managing my money very well. All that to say that I developed I don't want to say a drinking problem, but it was a drinking problem. And funny enough, I quit drinking for, I don't know, probably 10 years or more, because I thought that I was an alcoholic. And some may say, yes, you are an alcoholic, but what I realize as I get older is I just make very bad habits. As far as being an alcoholic, no, I just like to drink. I wanted to drown my sorrows away, or whatever the case may be, and have alcohol, because it took my mind off of the stress that I was having, just trying to provide for the family. So I don't think it's alcoholic, but at the time, I convinced myself that I was an alcoholic because I was just buying alcohol instead of paying the bills. And then the house gets behind. I think our house payment at the time was like $1,200, which was a lot. It was a lot back then because $1,200 was just a huge amount for me to try to swing. And then those of you that get in this, that know that when you get in the cycle of not making one house payment and then you get behind and it all just kind of unravels, it's very hard to get caught up. As I got older and I got better with the finances, I make sure that I will never, ever get behind on any kind of payment, because catching up sucks. Because in your mind, you're like, well, I'll just catch up on this later. Or I know that my paycheck is going to be a little bit more next time, and I know I can pay this. Well, the problem is because then you pay whatever it is that you'd owed on, that you're behind on, and then you're behind on something else. And it's just a cycle that continues over and over and over. And that was a cycle that I was in. Just in your mind, you're just, this will never end, so it doesn't really matter. So I'll just drink. And so that's what I did. I was just drinking and drinking and drinking and doing all the things. And it was just a bad time in my life, to where I let things get so bad that they were sending foreclosure notices on my house over there behind Hester. I was like, no, they're not going to foreclose on me. No, they're not going to foreclose on me. No, they're not going to do it. Well, if you fuck around and find out, they will foreclose on you. And I'm here to tell you, because they foreclosed on me. So I'll never forget, it was December 21st of whatever year that was. It was almost Christmas time. We had our Christmas tree up. The kids were getting ready, and when I was growing up, my parents would argue in front of me and my brothers and not give a shit about it. And I always, you always want to raise your kids or do a better job than your parents did. And my parents did a great job with raising us, but there were things that they did that I will never, ever do around my kids. You can probably ask all three of my kids right now if they've ever heard me and Nikki argue, and they would probably tell you no. Because if we have any kind of disagreement or any kind of situation, we would go in another room and we would talk about it, because I never wanted the kids to feel any kind of insecurity about anything like that. So I don't know, maybe Hayden, of all of them, would probably be like, well, there was this one time, and he'll probably ding me on that, but that's fine. In general, we never argued in front of the kids. So we were having these issues. We were about to get kicked out of the house. And I told Nikki, I'm like, I don't know what to do. My credit was all fucked up. I wasn't paying any of the bills. I was behind on everything. I was drinking a lot. And there's just all these problems. Well, prior to that December 21st, a couple weeks before, I decided to quit drinking. And I remember that I just had to, I hid away for about a week and kind of got it out of my system, and then I was fine. But I'd kind of connect that time in my life to drinking, so I stayed away from it for a long time, which was fine. I needed a good 10-year break from drinking to get my life in order, because that's really what happened. It takes a while to recover your finances and just to recover your life after all of that. So anyway, December 21st, we're foreclosed. They're kicking us out before Christmas. And I'm like hiding this from my family. I'm hiding, not my immediate family. Nikki knows at this point, my dad and all them, they don't know. I could have asked my dad for help and he would have helped me. But you're embarrassed. How did you let this get out of hand so bad? And so I remember we were going to go to the Fairview Christmas parade, and we were going to walk down there, because we lived probably, a 5 or 10 minute walk. We can just walk down there and watch it and then walk home. And I remember I went into my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. And I got down on my hands and knees and I said, God, if you exist, can you show me a sign? Because I never really believed in God, or it just wasn't really an issue to me in my mind. I didn't care about any of that. You know, we weren't really forced to go to church or anything like that when we were kids. We were Christians, just like everybody was Christians, but it didn't really mean anything. And I was at the bottom of the barrel. You know, I had a few weeks of not drinking, so I was headed in the right direction, but I had nowhere to go. We were being kicked out right before Christmas. And I remember I got on Google and I said, how do you pray? I'll never forget that. I did a Google search of how do you pray? And, you know, just dumb, just not dumb, just ignorant to everything and just desperate. And so I got down on my hands and knees and I asked God. And I remember being on my hands and knees and by the bed and I'm, all right, well, what do I do now? But God answers you when you have a humble heart and if you ask. And that's what I learned over the years and some many other stories that I'll tell in another time. But yeah, I got down on my hands and knees. I prayed. I remember I got up. I'm like, well, all right, I prayed. And check that off the list. Not really check it off the list. I mean, that was a lie. I already checked everything else off the list. That was it. And so I got up, I took Jack, and we went outside. And I do want to mention that we tried to get an apartment. We tried to rent houses. We tried to do all of these things, and nothing was coming up. And we were just desperate. And so I got up, took Jack down the road, started walking to the end of my driveway. I get to the end of my driveway, and I look across the street. Literally, the driveway across the street from my house, there was a for rent sign. And I was like, all right, God, I guess you, maybe you answered this prayer. And so I started like getting nervous, you know, sweating about it. It was in the middle of December and I didn't know what to think. I was like, is this real? And so we went on down to the Christmas parade, did all that. And I told Nikki about the sign and we were just like kind of floored about the whole situation. And so we get back from like the whole time while I'm at the Christmas parade with Jack, you know, he's picking up candy off the ground. He's real young. He's probably 3 or 4 or something. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 5. This is where I don't remember ages and all that kind of stuff. I remember what he looks like in my head. And I have a picture of him when I was at that parade. It's a real shitty picture that I took of him looking up at me and me snapping a picture of him. And I had that picture hung on the wall for a long time, just as a reminder of that moment. And, you know, he's cute in the picture and all that kind of stuff. So we get back from the parade and I immediately take Jack in the house. I don't remember what the other 2 kids were doing. They might have been at their grandparents or something like that. But I remember specifically it was just Jack with me. So took him back in the house and I go across the street and I'm going to talk to this person over here or hope that the person's there. I don't know if everybody else is like this. Well, actually, I know that everybody else is not like this. But for me, I'm very aware of a lot of things. I'm aware of my surroundings. I'm very cautious when I'm driving. I would like to think that I'm a really good driver. I'm paying attention. But when it comes to things like what are my neighbors doing or anything like that, I don't give a shit. I'm not that person that's like looking out the window wondering, hey, what's going on across the street? Or, hey, what's going on over here? And so I remember thinking when I saw that for rent sign, like I didn't even know that there was a house back there. I just never paid attention to it. But because you couldn't see the house from the road, it was a pretty long driveway that went back in there. I didn't even know what it looked like back there. So I walked across the street, walked down through there, literally right across the street from my house, walked and walked, and the driveway was really long, walked and walked. And I got to the house, and there were some workers there and an old guy there. And, the place was, they were apparently a renter or whatever who moved out. I didn't even know that the house was for rent, or it was somebody owned it and rented it out. And I guess that doesn't even matter saying that, because I didn't even know the damn place existed. So anyway, it's just a little house, I think there was 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, no, 2 baths, just a little house. So I went up to the house and I knocked on the door, and this older gentleman, his name was Ed Groves. He passed away a few years ago, and I went up to him and I introduced myself, and I told him, I said, are you in charge of renting out this house? And he said, yes, I am in charge of renting this house out. And I asked him, I said, I told him, I said, I'd be interested in renting this out. I live across the street and I really need to be out pretty soon. How would I apply for this, and blah, 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 blah. He didn't even really care about talking about those specific details. And when I look at it in retrospect, because as I get older, and I think as we all get older, we're basing people, how we feel about people or how we trust people, on our gut, the conversation that you're having. And so he just kind of asked me about myself and asked me about my family, asked about all those kind of things. And I just told him, I was being honest with him. I told him, in my mind, I'm sitting there telling this guy this, but I'm telling him all the things that he's asking me, and I'm probably making a pretty good first impression. But also, I'm thinking, is he going to run a credit check? Is he going to want some references? Just thinking about that kind of stuff, because I was having to think about all of those things all the time. And that's just how my brain worked. And he looked at me after a couple minutes, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, son, do you go to church? And again, that kind of clicked with me in my head when I prayed for the first time, not knowing what I was doing, asking God for a sign. I'm like, dang, sign 1, for rent sign in the yard. Sign 2, Ed Groves asking me if I go to church. And I told him, I was just be honest with him. I said, no, sir, I don't go to church. And he was like, why don't you come to church with me? And he had he attended a little outfit I'll talk about later in Bellevue at a YMCA, just it wasn't a big church. It was just in a YMCA room. It was like a startup, I guess. And I said, half of me was like amazed that God is obviously working this miracle, and huge miracle in my life at the time. But the other part of me is like, yeah, I'll do whatever you say. I just need a place to live. And so then I asked him after we had a conversation, had a couple laughs for a minute, and I said, well, would I have a chance at renting this place? He's like, oh yeah, we'll get the paperwork. And hey guys, when are y'all gonna be done in here? A few days? Yeah, you can move in a few days. And I'm just like that. Hey, you can move in a few days. I looked for months. I couldn't get an apartment. Of course, I did have we had to stay in Fairview. I didn't want the kids to feel like they are being uprooted. We probably could have moved to Nashville or do something like that, but I couldn't get an apartment. I couldn't find a house for rent that I could afford. And our house payment was $1,200 or $1,300 a month. Ed Groves charged us, it was $700 or $800 rent. And I was just like, man, this is huge for me. So yeah, that was a turning point in my life. I remember when we moved in before Christmas, we literally got a trailer. I just came out with it all to my dad and all that. Hey, we had a lot of financial problems and we're out, but look here, here's how I recovered. I got this house over here. And so That's what I did. That's what we did. I remember we borrowed my dad's trailer, and we would just put all of our shit on the back of this trailer and in a truck that I borrowed, and literally drive it across the street and unload it. I remember, I think it was Eli standing on the back of the trailer holding our Christmas tree with all the ornaments and everything still on it, driving it across the street to this house, and we spent Christmas there. New carpet, new, remodeled it, new bathroom. I guess the people that were in it before didn't take very good care of it. But yeah, so that's how we ended up there. And that was a huge part of my life. And I just wanted to share that with everybody, to anybody that doesn't have hope or something like that, when you're kind of at your wit's end, or even if you're not at your wit's end, or at the end of the road or bottom of the barrel or anything, there's always hope. And but yeah, so I guess we'll stop, according to my outline that I've written here. We'll stop here on this one, and I'll continue on another episode. But I want to get into how it went going to that church that Ed took me to, and how I still wasn't convinced about God 100%. All of the non-believers out there will never be 100% convinced, because if I still wasn't convinced, after having, that for rent sign that I saw, and then Ed asking me if I went to church and all that kind of stuff, and I was convinced at the time, but then, your flesh part of you is talking you out of it. It's like, if you continually give in to that flesh part of you, you will never believe, and you'll never see all of the great things that can happen in your life. So we'll stop it right there. And on the next episode, we will get into a little more of the church stuff, because I don't want to say the rise and fall of Tim going to church, but there's not a fall in Jesus, but there's definitely a fall in mankind and how people treat you and how the church operates. So thank you guys for listening. Check us out, www.thefairviewsocialpodcast.com, and we will see you soon. See ya.